Narraive Pro might let you make games far beyond previous limits, but it is also a stonking big tool, and for that reason it is very easy to get lost. And in this video, I'm going to take you over the entire framework in 1 hour. If you're new to Narraive Pro, you have to watch this video. It will give you the big picture, it will stop you getting so lost, and it will stop you getting frustrated. Understand that learning Narraive Pro will take time, so don't expect to understand everything immediately. Unless you aren't planning on modifying Narraive Pro at all, Narraive Pro is not a replacement for learning Unreal Engine, since Narraive Pro extends Unreal Engine. The more Unreal you know, the more comfortable you will be. At a bare minimum, you really want to learn how the Unreal Engine framework is laid out. This page on the Unreal Engine website does a great job of showing you how everything is laid out, and from there, we're going to show you how we've built off of that to create Pro. The more you learn Pro's framework, the more you will be rewarded. Too often we see people remaking features that Pro already handles. Let's begin with the game mode and game states and show you how Narraive Pro extends this piece of the framework. Okay, so this is the game mode. Whenever you see a gray node, that just means an Unreal Engine piece. And you can see that we've extended out the game mode and created the narrative game mode. If you have any C++ knowledge, I'd recommend coming into your IDE and searching for narrative game mode, opening it up, and actually looking at how it works, because often it's not as complicated as you might think, right? Really, the main thing that the game mode does in Narraive Pro is when you hit play, the game mode is responsible for loading in your player definition, which is what contains all your player's items, your player's level, what your player should look like, and so on. We'll talk more about player definitions later. The game state has been extended to add on a time of day system and an alliance system, which tells you which factions feel which way about others. Like, imagine you run into a group of bandits. Well, if your player is a bandit, they probably shouldn't attack you, right? But if your player is someone else, maybe the bandits should attack you. So when I'm in game here and I press the wait button and I wait for 1 hour, it's the game state that is updating the time of day and hence the skybox here. It's also the game state that makes this bandit attack me when he spawns in, because he knows that I am an enemy of his. And that's because if I open up the bandit archer's definition, you can see he's in this bandits faction, and my player is in this heroes faction. And in the game state, you can see that the bandits are hostile towards the heroes faction, and that's how he knows to aggro me when he spawns in. We'll talk more about these player definitions in a bit. So that's how the game mode initializes your character and how the game state updates the time of day and contains the alliance system. And remember, if you want to add on to these in Narraive Pro, you can extend these classes and, do my custom game mode. And I would recommend seeing our Narraive Pro best practices video, which shows you how to do that. Moving on now, we're going to show you how we extend the controller that comes with Unreal Engine to add in a whole bunch of features like quests and dialogue and interaction and so on. Here is the base Unreal Engine controller. Unreal Engine comes with two types of controller, the player controller and the AI controller. So we have extended those to make the narrative NPC controller and the narrative player controller. The player controller contains human-based interaction, like I need to look at a certain item and press the E key to interact with it, and NPCs have AI-based interaction, which works a little bit differently, because obviously AI don't look with the camera at certain things and press the E key. Their interaction works a little bit differently. The player controller contains stuff for quest markers and navigation, quests and dialogues, playing cinematics, adding menus to the screen, and as always, highly recommend coming in here, searching for a narrative player controller, and just having a look at how some of this stuff works, because it might not always be as complicated as you think. Like, okay, here's the interaction component. If I want to know how the player interacts with things, I could look at this and see how this works. And it is a pretty big framework, but we really do our best to put lots of comments and stuff so that you can sort of understand how it all works. So when you look at an interactable item and take it, that is all being handled by the player controller. When I open a menu, like the pause menu, that is being added to the screen by the player controller. When I have a marker added to my compass or my screen, that is a navigation marker and is handled through the player controller. When I start a dialogue with a character, that is handled in the Tails component, which is a part of the narrative player controller.
I'm Seth, the leader of the heroes.
This NPC here, Blacksmith Nirvana, is doing a little bit of a smithing interact right now. And he's doing that because his NPC controller has a goal added to it, and he is acting on that goal. And for anyone using the plugin, I'd highly recommend you learning to use the gameplay debugger. You can activate it on any character by pressing the semicolon key. And you can now see in the top left of the screen all of the goals that this character has. And you can see in the top corner, it says interact with Anvil, score 1. So that's what he's doing right now. But watch this. I'm going to talk with him. And I'm going to say, you should take a break. And when I do that...
You know what? Yeah, why not?
Watch this. He's going to stop smithing. And you can see he's got a new goal to interact with the chair. He's going to come and do that. That's all being handled through his NPC controller's activity component. So that's a little bit about the NPC controller. And when he interacts with that seat there, that's being handled using his NPC interaction component, which allows him to interact with something, obviously not by looking at it and pressing E, but by being told to do it using a goal. And you can see we automatically remove that goal, and he goes back to doing his other goal. So you can see that the NPC controller allows for a style of interaction that's completely different from player interaction. And if you want to know more about that whole UtilityAI system, definitely watch our NPCs and AI video where we show you how to set up complex AI behavior. And UtilityAI is awesome. It's like a way of getting amazingly complex NPC behavior, but in doing it in a really simple way. It's kind of the best of both worlds. Both the player controller and the NPC controller are saved to disk using the narrative save subsystem. So, for example, all of the quests that you were doing need to be saved to disk, and we can do that by saving your player controller to disk and restoring it later on. Next up, we're going to show you how Narraive extends Unreal Engine's character class. Now, Unreal Engine's character class is great, but it is missing a lot of really useful functionality, and most studios are going to have to end up making that themselves. So that's a big thing that Narraive's trying to stop you from having to do. The general way that the character works is we've extended the base character to make the narrative character class. And there are two sort of flavors, if you will. There is the narrative player character and the narrative NPC character. And they each kind of are set up differently, right? The player character has a gameplay camera on it, right? Because NPCs obviously don't need to have a camera. The NPCs have a dialogue. When you walk up to them, you might be able to talk to them, for example, whereas the player character doesn't have that because it doesn't need to have dialogue. The narrative character will instantiate itself using the data in the narrative character definition. So you remember at the start of the video, I was talking about the player definition being loaded in by the game mode. That is what this is here, the narrative character definition. It stores things like your player's appearance, what items they should have, what level they are, and the narrative character loads all of that in from this character definition. That archer that I spawned in earlier has a bow because in his character definition, in his items to grant, you can see there is a demo bow. We are granting him a demo bow. We're giving him the bandit appearance and so on. So this is where all of that sort of default data for a character lives. It lives in the character definition. This is an NPC definition, and so it will also have NPC specific stuff like what dialogues this bandit should play if there are any. And this is my player character's definition. So it obviously doesn't have NPC related stuff in here because it doesn't need it. And in the demo map, the character is invulnerable because I've added this invulnerable tag. So you can also define default tags, what factions the player's in, all sorts of stuff goes in here. Remember though that the definition just stores the defaults for the player. To show you what I mean, I've hit play here and my player has been granted all of their default items. But if I was to drop my rifle on the ground, for example, and then save my game, I'm not going to have that rifle when I come back in because it's going to correctly identify that my player needs to be loaded back in from their save. If I load my save back in, you can see my player doesn't have the rifle. And actually, a little extra flex, it remembers the rifle was dropped on the ground. So Pretty cool. And same goes for NPC characters. If I had a follower and I gave my follower a pistol, when I save, even though there's not a pistol in their default items, because they are loading back in from a save, they will still have the pistol when you come back into the game. The narrative character subsystem is just like a really useful manager for characters. You can grab it at any time and do things like manually spawn in an NPC. You can do things like find a NPC or find a certain character in the world. And it also has certain sanity checks. Like, for example, imagine your game has an NPC called King Charles, and you only ever want one King Charles to be spawned in at a time. It will stop you from accidentally spawning multiple of them, so it's a bit of a sanity checker as well. The narrative character movement component extends the base character movement component that comes with Unreal Engine and adds in support for things like mantling, climbing, swimming, ragdolling, walking along cover, and toggling walk and jog. It is the reason why if I jump into this body of water, my character plays a dive animation and is able to do this swimming here. It is the reason why I can jump, grab onto the sledge, and pull myself up. All of that is being handled through the CMC. Next up, let's talk about character and weapon visuals. You may have noticed that I mentioned in the character definition there is an appearance that is also set. An appearance is a type of data asset that stores all of your character's art inside of it. When your narrative character is spawned in, it will spawn itself a narrative character visual, and it will pass the character appearance asset to the visual. The visual will asynchronously load all of the appearance data in the asset, and this is very smart because a lot of noobs, common noob mistake is to not asynchronously load the character art and your game will stutter and hitch really badly, but we will asynchronously load that in and add it to the character visual. The character visual supports lots of pretty complex stuff like first-person rendering, perspective switching. It allows you to make lots of different types of character like bipeds or quadrupeds such as horses. And you can subclass it if you need more sort of custom behavior. For example, metahumans need a little bit of extra logic, so we subclass the character visual to make a special metahuman character visual. This comes with Narraive Pro if you ever want to use a metahuman setup. So let's run through that in game, right? My character has the many appearance on its player definition. So when I hit play, the game mode loads my appearance into my character. My character will spawn the character visual and pass the character visual the appearance asset. It will asynchronously load in all of these assets to prevent hitching. Finally, when that's done, the weapons will be attached to that newly spawned character visual. Each character piece is identified using a tag. So for example, here in this Oscar appearance, you can see that mesh.legs is set to these pants. And this is why certain items like, for example, these leggings can replace Oscar's pants. It's because the plate legs that I equipped, they know that they need to go to the legs slot, and the character visual is smart enough to go, oh, we have these pants on at the legs slot. The plate legs need to replace that slot. And so that sort of behavior is sort of added into the visual as well. The ability to replace out these default meshes. You'll notice that nowhere in the schematic exists an inventory system, and that's because Unreal Engine does not ship with one of those. So we've rolled out narrative inventory in order to give you that functionality should you need it. We've built out the inventory using a custom actor component called the narrative inventory component. By default, NPCs and players will both have one of these. It comes with UI, but you can completely remove the UI. The UI is just a menu that interacts with the inventory, but is not needed for the inventory to function. And the inventory component has lots of helpful functions like try add item, find items of class, consume item, and so on. And all items are saved. So whatever items you have, they're saved using the subsystem. Your inventory component will have a reference to many narrative items, and these are just a simple object type that stores lots of different pieces of info like weight, value, basic information, but it also has fragment support for composition. So you can build your items up out of building blocks called fragments. But of course, the traditional inheritance sort of hierarchy setup is also supported. and is how we roll out a lot of our items. You would want to create a narrative item when all you need is a basic item that doesn't really need to be able to do anything. This is, for example, maybe, I don't know, a key would be a good example of a narrative item. Doesn't really need to do anything, it just kind of lives in your inventory. We add a bunch of items out of the box, the equipable item, the gameplay effect item, the weapon attachment item, but we obviously want you to create your own custom item types as well, because lots of people are going to need custom item types in their games. But these are some really useful ones that we give you out of the box. The equipable item is the base for any item that can be equipped and defines slots that the item should go to. That's the exact same slots as the pants slot that I just showed you for the character visual. They can also grant abilities to your character, like a jetpack can grant a fly ability. They can modify attributes, like a helmet can increase your defense attribute. And then there are more specialized types of equipable items. The clothing item is what those plate legs that I just showed you use, right? It actually applies a mesh change to the character visual. Weapon items add a weapon visual to the character visual, and is how the rifle and the pistol that you saw my character using and the bow that bandit was using, that's how that works. The bow is actually a ranged weapon item, and so is the pistol. This is kind of a specialized type of weapon item that just has a little bit of extra functionality for things like weapon spread. If I was to come into the level and click on these plate legs and browse to them, you can see this is a clothing item blueprint. And if I open it up, it's got the clothing to apply, what slot to apply the plate legs to, and so on. But you can create your own at any time, right? Right click, go to narrative items, and you can see clothing item, equipable item, weapon item. You can make these right in here. I can make a new piece of clothing right now and open that up and input my mesh, what the name of the item should be, and so on. And we really want you to subclass and create your own narrative items. That's really a big part of this whole system. For example, I decided for fun to create a custom book item. This actually is included in the demo content. And if you look at the book item, when you use it, it actually adds a 3D book menu onto the screen. If I hit play, take the book, and click the book in the menu, you can see it actually opens a 3D book. Extending items to do whatever custom stuff you want is really easy, as this book kind of demonstrates. You can make an item do literally whatever you want. Items also support being saved to disk, right? Here is a little example, a pyramid item, and every time you use it, it will add 1 to this counter. You can see it says you've used the pyramid 4 times. So items can actually hold state within them. But not only that, but if I was to actually save my game, they can save that state to disk, right? If I was to save and come back in later on, that pyramid would remember how many times I've used it, right? Because it's actually able to save its state to disk and load it back in later. This can be done by going to any variable on your item and just making sure you have the save game box checked. That's how narrative save system will save any state to disk, is by remembering to have this save game checked, and it will automatically serialize this all for you. Inventory components don't just have to live on your character though. You can also add them to things like chests. So here I've added an inventory component to this chest, and you can see under its default item tables, I've actually granted it a data table that it will populate itself using. So you can use this to kind of create random loot in chests as well. There's also a loot interaction that I've added to this chest, and what it allows me to do is interact with the chest, and it will add the loot menu to the screen. And this is basically a menu that facilitates loading 2 inventories in, and if I was to click this, it transfers from one inventory to the other. And obviously you don't need to use this UI, or you could roll out your own UI. This just kind of helps you facilitate this sort of thing. The loot interaction actually has kind of cool functionality too, that makes it so that you need certain items to open certain chests and stuff like that. And inventories can actually be set up as shops as well. This one here has a configuration option set that makes it a shop, and you can see that you actually have to have currency to buy the items. You can see my character doesn't have any currency, so I won't be able to buy any of these. There is actually the console command give currency, so I could give myself some money, and now I will be able to buy some of these items. There is a huge amount to say about weapon items because they really do extend a lot of behavior. And we'd really recommend looking at some of these setup pre-configured items here in the demo map, because that will really help you to learn a lot. But if we look at the demo sword here, for example, if I was to open this up, you can see that there are a bunch of settings in the weapon item that are not available for other items. The holster attachment configs define how the item should attach to your character visual when it's holstered. We have the character visual class, or the weapon visual class, I should say. That's what I was talking about earlier. This is the actual thing that gets spawned in and attached to your character visual. You can see here we have the wield attachment configs. This defines how the item should attach when you actually get the weapon out. You know, tons to say here. Required ammo. This is like if you want to have an ammo class be supported. The weapon hand defines whether it's dual wieldable, whether it's something like a shield that can only go on the offhand, a main hand only weapon like a one-handed sword, two-handed weapon like a great sword. The abilities to grant, and also the abilities to grant when in the main hand and the abilities to grant when in the offhand. So you have sort of 3 different abilities depending on whether the weapon's dual wieldable or not. If it's not dual wieldable, they'll only be weapon abilities. In fact, if I change this here to main hand, you can see it changes here. If I do two-handed, there's only 1 list of abilities. So depending on the hand setup, will depend what sort of abilities you need to put in. It's kind of easier for you to get a good grasp of this by just looking at all of these weapon items and how they're set up, how the data is inputted into them in the demo map. And you can click on any of these, go to weapon demo pistol here, for example, and see exactly how the weapon demo pistol is set up. And usually, you know, you can even get away with kind of copy and pasting these and just changing out some of the pieces that you want. That's often what I tend to do when I'm creating a new weapon item. Weapon attachment items will attach themselves to a weapon visual, and by default, if you take them, they have code that will automatically add themselves on. You can see here my rifle automatically had that scope added to it, and this will change how the weapon behaves in the first-person perspective as well. So pretty awesome there. And, you know, it's worth noting, weapon attachment, that's just an item that we went and made. You know, you really can go and make anything like that on your own by subclassing narrative item and adding the modifications in to do what you want. The last item that is included out of the box that I want to talk about in this video is the gameplay effect item. You can see in the demo map we have a stand sort of showing these. And if I was to select one of them, say the health potion, you can see that the gameplay effect item selects a gameplay effect to apply. Gameplay effects, you know, you can do tons of stuff with these. I can make the player invisible so enemies can't spot them. I can make the player invulnerable for a set amount of time. I could heal the player by like 2 points every 4 seconds. Literally any sort of effect you want. Gameplay effects are very powerful in gameplay ability system. But if you look at this health potion, super simple, just adds 10 to this heal attribute and 50 to stamina. I'm not really sure why it affects stamina, but anyways, what it's going to do is it's going to apply this effect, and in this case we've selected item instant, and it'll apply this to the player essentially. And just to show you that here, I'm going to take the health potion item and I'm going to use it. You can see that it's restoring health. Pretty nice. Unreal Engine's gameplay ability system is really amazing. Plenty of high-profile games have shipped with it, and for good reason. It's a really good system. We have extended it fairly significantly, however, in Narraive Pro. And basically, the ways in which we've extended it, we've added a narrative ability system component. This is the one that will exist on both player and NPC characters. You can activate abilities via input tags, which is kind of the way that Lyra does it. You have events for on damaged, on healed, on died, etc. And then we've done some pretty heavy subclassing of gameplay ability. Narrative gameplay ability allows for like helper functions for getting the owning narrative character. Combat gameplay ability has a ton of really useful combat related stuff like spawning projectiles, weapon targeting, weapon spread, hit scans, poisons, applying damage. The list goes on and on and on. And we're going to do a combat video that'll really deep dive into everything that the combat gameplay ability gives you. And then there's combo ability base, which extends, you know, combo stuff, and melee weapons use these. And there is, I haven't showed it, but there's really like 20 different children of this combat gameplay ability. Combat gameplay ability is essentially the base for every attack in Narrative, from the, you know, rifle shoot to the sword swipe to the wand lightning bolt attack. They all extend this at the base. We did roll out a basic attribute set. I think it would be pretty easy to modify this to your tastes, or just swap it out for another one. You can see we've given you a bunch of useful default attributes like health, armor, sneak rating, and things like this. I'll go more into that in the combat video, but if you look in any character definition, there is an ability configuration which stores all of the abilities that the character gets out of the box when they spawn in. So you can see your character has the ability to crouch, sprint, jump. We have your default player attributes in here, startup effects. This is a effect that regenerates your stamina over time. You can really give whatever abilities you want to whatever character you want, and you can switch this out per character definition. So like certain characters might not need to crouch, so you could remove that from this list here. I'll do my best to also cover kind of the basic concepts of gameplay ability system in the combat video that we're releasing along with 2.2. It's probably a little bit out of scope for this video though. The next big concept is the narrative save subsystem. We actually do have some videos on the channel that go into this in some of our older guides, and they're still pretty up to date. The save subsystem doesn't really change that much from version to version. Let me explain how it works. In a video game, there's really so much stuff that you want to save. Often you want to save like actors in the world, but you might also want to save the character's health and stamina. You might also want to save the items in the player's inventory. And we save all of that stuff out of the box. But if you add new stuff, obviously that's not just going to be saved by default. You need to use the save subsystem to save it. And let's explain how it works. The narrative save subsystem is a world subsystem that we've added. And what it allows you to do is save and load the player's game, and also save and load actors separately. And actors are saved using something called an actor record. When you save, the subsystem basically looks in the world for all savable actors and creates a record for all of the savable actors. You remember that chest that I talked about earlier? Well, imagine that you want this chest to remember what items were in the chest. You need it to be saved to disk, right? So if I go up to this chest, you can see it's got a sword in it, right? And actually, if I take the sword and save, when I come back into the game and load my game in, you'll notice that the sword is not in this chest anymore. So the chest has correctly saved its state to disk and loaded it back in. So for that chest, the way that we got the save system to save it is if we open up the chest. If you go to class settings, we've added the narrative savable actor interface, and the save subsystem will pick up any actors that have that interface. So that's how you mark the chest as being savable. The other thing you have to do is just create a GUID, and we use this function to randomly create an ID. And actually, if I click on the chest, you can see that ID here. So this ID is used to fetch the record later on when we load back in. So when we save this chest, we create a record for it under this ID. You can see that on begin play, we call the load single actor function, and this will load the chest back in from its record. And it's able to do that because it has this interface. It can ask for the ID, it can get the record, it can load the actor back in, and it will actually return a value telling you whether or not it loaded the actor back in. Because maybe if this is a new game, there was no record to load, right? So you can check. The other thing that we do is that when the chest ends play, we actually save it to disk. You might be wondering why we would want to do that. In open world games, if I run really far away from the chest, it might actually be unloaded by world partition. This is an optimization, right? And what I'm actually doing here is before world partition loads it out on end play, I'm saving it. And then if I come back to this area of the map, it's going to load that chest back in. So the save subsystem isn't just for saving your game and coming back later. It's also a little bit of a world partition hack quite useful. The reason that the items inside of the chest are saved is because the narrative inventory component here, if you actually go and look at it, you'll see that in C++ it is marked as a savable component. You can see iNarrative savable component. And because it has been added, in this case, to a savable actor, the chest, it will correctly be saved to disk. Now, narrative inventory, we've already made all the save logic right out of the box for you. You don't have to do anything, but for your reference, if you ever add a component in the future and you need your component to be saved, you can look at, for example, the inventory component to see how something like that is done. But the simple answer is just to go to interfaces and add the savable component or savable actor interfaces, and then you will have functions for like onload, get good, and so on. And as mentioned, I really recommend looking at some of the actors in the demo map, like this chest, or check out some of those older videos that cover the save subsystem, because they are all still pretty relevant. Now, we do have a video on NPCs and AI that I would highly recommend you check out, because we actually show you how to go about making these and explain them a little bit more in depth. But for the high-level sort of overview of these, basically on every NPC controller lives something called an NPC activity component. And this is the component responsible for selecting the behavior or activity to run. And activities are kind of the building blocks of behavior that define what a NPC is able to do. So for example, if you had a melee NPC who uses a sword, you might give them the attack melee behavior here. You might also give them the walk to destination behavior so that they can sort of move to certain goal destinations as well. And even the interact behavior if you need them to be able to sort of interact with things. But what if you have someone who's a meleeer, but they also need to be able to use a bow? Well, in that case, you would give them the melee attack activity, but also maybe attack range strafe, or if you wanted them to use the bow from cover, you could give them ranged cover. So it's this idea of composition that you can build your NPCs up out of the behaviors you want. In fact, if we look at that archer that we spawned in earlier, and we go into his NPC definition, you can see that there is a activity configuration, and we've actually given him the run and gun activity configuration. There's kind of a few that we give you out of the box. You're obviously encouraged to create your own. But if I open one of them up, you can see inside of it is basically all of the activities that this character can do. And every 0.5 seconds, we will rescore the activities and select the best one. Also, goal generators, I did forget to mention. Goal generators basically just generate goals. So for example, goal generator attack. If the enemy sees someone and they are an enemy, it will create an attack goal automatically. And that's pretty much it. But what are goals, I hear you ask? Well, goals are the what of the behavior, the thing that the behavior operates on. So attack melee, for example, the NPC might see 3 enemies that it can attack. So it will have 3 attack goals, and it needs to select the best one to do, essentially. So the goal is kind of the what, and the activity is kind of the how. Like, how do we actually do it? What's it supposed to do? For example, if we have an attack goal, attack melee will run towards it and keep trying to swipe at them with the melee weapon. Range strafe, will sort of move from side to side and try to be difficult to hit whilst we shoot you. So there's kind of different ways we can attack one of our attack goals. Another example, you might have a move to destination goal, and you might have 2 ways that you can move to a destination. Maybe you have a jetpack and you're able to fly around, and maybe if you can't reach it on foot, the fly activity will score a lot higher and the NPC will use that instead. I highly encourage you to look in the AI activities folder, because we have a whole bunch of example activities, and they are actually relatively easy to understand some of these. The attacks can be a little bit trickier to understand, but I'll show you one of them here, like the melee attack, for example. If you actually go into this, you can see it has a score function. This is how the activity defines what its score is. And you can see, like, for example, if we can't see the enemy, if we haven't been able to see them for a while, we return basically 0. We return a very low score. If you can't reach the enemy, then we also return a extremely low score, because with a melee weapon, you need to be able to reach the enemy so that you can hit them. So there's a fair bit of complexity, but you'll find that UtilityAI manages the complexity really well, right? Obviously, this is starting to get a little complex, but it breaks it into nice little pieces, right? Each activity has its own scoring function. And if you go to the defaults, this is the actual behavior tree that gets ran. And you can see it is actually relatively simple, right? It just keeps trying to attack over and over again. Make sure you're looking at the enemy and basically just run towards the enemy over and over again. That's pretty much it. Spawners might sound a little bit boring, but they're actually a really important piece of making a game, particularly for open world games. So, I'm sure you guys all know, if you have an open world game, let's just take Skyrim as an example, you cannot have all of the NPCs in the game spawned in at one time, right? The game would literally crash, it wouldn't be able to run. That's just way too much going on for your computer to handle. And the way that you get around this is you only spawn in actors that are near your player. And this is probably the biggest thing that spawners handle. Whether it's an NPC spawner that's spawning some NPCs in, or a pickup spawn, or a vehicle spawn, whatever, it really, at the base of it, is making sure that we only have things spawned in that are supposed to be spawned in right now. And often it will spawn in its actors on begin play and despawn them later on. But you can also create spawners like this one that are not activated on begin play. So if I actually click on that, this is the archer that I spawned earlier. You can see it has activate on begin play unchecked. And this button here has a little bit of code on it that actually asks the spawner to spawn in its actors. So you don't have to activate them on begin play, but activating on begin play, remove on end play is really the most common pattern that you'll see. And spawners are basically doing that, only having actors spawn in when you're nearby. And the way we do that is by kind of piggybacking off world partition. If you're not familiar with how world partition works, world partition is like an Unreal Engine feature. It will make sure that only things that are nearby are spawned in. And that includes spawners, right? So here we have a spawner that spawns in this guy here called Seth, right? So I'll just use him as an example. If I hit play, Seth exists, right? He's here in the level. But if I was to fast travel to the other side of the map, let's say I go over here, I am now nowhere near Seth, right? I'm on the other side of the map, and so Seth will be despawned. And the reason Seth will be despawned is because the spawner that created Seth will be despawned. And when spawners end play, they remove all of their NPCs. So Seth won't be spawned in. But when I come back to this part of the map, Seth's spawner will be loaded back in by world partition. And because the spawner comes back, Seth comes back, right? So you're kind of tying the lifetime of NPCs to that spawner. It's not just NPCs though. Spawners can spawn anything. Spawners can actually spawn other spawners if you want them to. So for example, if I search for spawner, you can see that there's spawner base. And you need to put spawn components on it. So for example, you could spawn in an actor spawn. This will spawn in an actor of the given type. So I could spawn in a... Do I have a cube? Physics test cube. Let's see if that works. We'll hit play. And there you go. Yeah, you can see it's spawned in that test cube. And if I was to go to the other side of the map, the spawner would unload and that test cube would unload. So it's a really nice way of optimizing for open worlds. But the most common sort of spawn that you would be using is called the NPC spawn. If you add an NPC spawn, this is like the one that's creating Seth basically. You can select an NPC that you want to spawn. So I could select Felix, for example, and Felix would spawn in here. You can also do things like override certain things about the NPC, like their name, their levels, stuff like that, just in case you want to override something from this definition here, just for this one spawn. NPCs also have this feature called untethering. This is kind of a little bit of an interesting one. You remember how I said how, like, the spawner needs to tie the lifetime of Seth to the spawner, and when I go to the other side of the map, Seth needs to be unloaded. Well, what if Seth starts following you? That's actually a really big problem, right? Because Seth is going to run with you. You'll run away onto the other side of the map. And at some point, Seth's spawner is going to unload. and Seth will be destroyed. Even though he's following you, he's supposed to come with you, right? He needs to basically untether from his spawn, and that's exactly what this distance means. If Seth is more than this distance from his spawn, he will be untethered, and he will not be destroyed by the spawner. He instead becomes tethered to your player. If that's not making sense, let me try explain from a bird's eye view. So Seth spawns in over here, right? And Seth is controlled by his spawner, this sort of blue thing here, right? Now, when I go all the way over here, Seth's spawner unloads, and so does Seth. But what if I'm doing a quest where Seth needs to come with you? Or what if Seth is an enemy and he starts chasing you, or for whatever reason, he comes with you? This is quite a common sort of scenario. This won't work, because if Seth comes with you, his spawner will unload, and Seth will just randomly be destroyed. He'll just pop out of the world. It will look super jank and terrible. So tethering essentially fixes that by saying that when the spawn unloads, if Seth is like way over here, if he's greater than the untethered distance away, this spawner will stop managing Seth. So the spawner will not destroy Seth, and Seth will instead be tethered to your player instead. He's no longer tethered to the spawner. Now, if you walk back to where the spawner is, Seth will re-tether onto his spawner, but as long as you're like on the other side of the map and the spawner is no longer loaded in, he will be tethered to you. This fixes another huge problem, which is that imagine that Seth comes with you on your adventure, your player saves their game, they close the game, and then they reload the game, right? Well, when you reload the game, the spawner is not loaded in anymore, and Seth will not load back in when you load your game back in. But any NPC that is tethered to you will be automatically loaded back in when you load your game as well. So it kind of fixes two very major issues that you have in open world games. The way a spawner works is it's literally just an actor, and it will have a bunch of spawn components on that actor. And when the spawn is activated, which is usually begin play, but it could be whenever you want, the spawner will grab all of the spawn components and ask them to spawn in their stuff. Could be a pickup, could be an actor, could be an NPC, could even be another spawner. You can actually nest spawners inside of each other if you want. Last feature I should mention is imagine you have a bunch of NPCs spawning in, you take them out, you save your game, you come back in, and the NPCs are spawned back in. That's stupid. You don't want that to happen, right? There's actually an option that lets you remember if an NPC was previously killed, and the spawner will deactivate itself. If you click on any NPC spawner, don't spawn if previously killed, that's what you want. This is perfect for things like clearing out dungeons, you know. If you come back to the dungeon later on, obviously it should still not have the person spawned in if you previously cleared out the dungeon. So that's a feature that we sort of give you out of the box. Narraive is filled with loads of really complex UI, and the way that we're able to get such great UI, multi-platform, all that sort of stuff, is by leveraging CommonUI, which comes with Unreal Engine and fixes a lot of the sort of classic problems that the base UI in Unreal Engine has. And we use it in a relatively similar way to Lyra, if you know Lyra, although maybe a slightly more simplified version. Basically, this narrative gameplay HUD is a user widget, and the narrative player controller has one of these, and it will add it to the screen. And this HUD can host any number of these narrative activatable widgets. We'll often call them narrative menus, kind of interchangeable. And you can see we've kind of got a bunch of examples here: world map, dialogue, character creator, settings menu. It's usually pretty obvious when one of these menus is on the screen because the actions will show up on the action bar down the bottom. And you can see that when I change menus, the actions will populate in there as well. I think I may as well show you how to make a basic menu. Probably the easiest way to do it, if you're a complete beginner, is just to copy one of the existing menus. So I'm just going to copy narrative menu underscore loading. This is just like a basic loading screen. And I will just throw it in here. I'll just call this narrative. I'll just call it narrative custom menu. Making menus is really just like any UMG or widget blueprint stuff that you might have done before. There's really nothing that bespoke going on outside of the CommonUI stuff that I'm about to explain. So I'm not going to give you like a UI tutorial here, but I'll show you some of the basics. We'll put in a narrative button text. If you want to learn how to change the style of the UI, we have a video on that. It's on the channel. So I'll just add an on-clicked event to this button, and we'll just print hello world or something like that, just to show you an extremely basic piece of UI. Hello world. And I'll just delete all that old loading stuff. Don't need any of that. To add a piece of UI to the screen, if you have a custom player controller, you'd want to put it in here. I'll just stick it in the narrative player controller in the meantime, just to show you this. So I'll just do debug key 8. If you look in the player controller, the base one, you can see we've actually hooked up a whole bunch of inputs to open different menus. But really, you can see how easy it is to open a menu here. So just as an example, if I was to add I'll just make it so that when I press the 8 key, all you have to do is get the gameplay HUD. You can just grab this from the player controller at any time. In fact, not that one. We want this one here. And simply just do open menu. And then that custom menu that we just made, select it. And this is very important. There's also a layer tag, and this defines what layer it goes onto. And they have a priority. So modal is the highest priority, and this will receive input first. Menu is lower priority, and game is even lower priority. So basically, if there's a menu open on the game screen, but then you pause the game, a pause menu will be added on the pause layer, or sorry, on the menu layer, and that will take precedence, right? Because when the pause menu is open, we don't want to be able to click stuff in the game layer. So these are kind of these layers. And same with modal, right? If I was in the pause menu and then I click save, the save game menu might be a modal that actually applies on top of the menu. And you can have many menus in one layer at one time. You could have 3 menus open in the game layer, for example, or the menu layer. And the most recently open menu will kind of be on the top. So I'm going to select menu layer. I'm going to add that to the screen. You can store a reference to it if you want. I actually am not even going to bother in this case. And I'll just compile and we'll jump in. Going to hit play, press 8, and you can see that that button's on the screen. I can click it and it does hello world. And you can really use this technique to build out whatever UI your game requires. If you open up the menu and go to the defaults panel, there are actually some settings, and really the biggest one that you'll want to know is, where is it? Input config. This lets you control whether you should show the mouse and whether you should still be able to look around with the menu open and different things like this. Really, it's best to just go and look at some of the example menus that exist in the plugin, and you can kind of just copy their configurations here in the details to achieve the same sort of logic. I will also say that because we're extending CommonUI, the more you understand and know about CommonUI, the easier of a time you're going to have making menus and things like that in Narraive Pro. All right, next we're going to talk about game user settings. This is a feature that comes with Unreal Engine, and Unreal Engine by default has some basic settings, but not actually as many as you might want. And so Narraive Game User Settings extends it to add things like audio levels, difficulty toggle, monitor selection, GPU and VRAM info, bloom toggle, motion blur toggle, huge amount of other settings. And we also have narrative menu, which we just talked about, but we extend a settings menu off of that. And it is a pre-made one that is made to modify these narrative game user settings. So yeah, we also extend narrative input settings. And this is because for some reason, Unreal Engine doesn't store your input settings in this game user settings. It has another class, enhanced input settings, that you extend off of. So we also have our own custom one for that. And the settings menu allows you to control these as well. You'll be able to see this if you go into the pause menu, go to settings, you can see a lot of these options are extended in here. Things like subtitles that aren't a default part of Unreal Engine. they're not exposed to Unreal Engine by default, at least, can be changed in here, and things like your language. It's worth noting we don't actually have the translations inputted, so you would have to input these if you wanted to support all these languages. It's something we're considering in future versions, just a lot of work to be done there. So yeah, you can remap inputs, change input sensitivity, invert controls. Yeah, and you can extend these menus too, which we will talk about in a future video. It's worth going a little bit into the interaction that exists on both the NPCs and players a little bit more deeply. So you can see the interaction component is sort of a base actor component, and we have two types that come off of the interaction component, an NPC type and a player type. And they each live on the corresponding NPC and player controller. The player interaction component supports things like holding a key down for X number of seconds to do the interaction. And there's kind of two types of interaction. There's this fire and forget interaction for stuff like pickups, where you just have to press the E key and it immediately takes the pickup. There's no animation, things like that. But we also have a more complex type of interaction called slot-based interaction, and that is used for things like seats, vehicles, and so on, and also supports the idea of occupying something, right? Like if I'm sitting on a seat, I'm occupying the seat and no one else should be able to use the seat, right? If you're using slot-based interaction, the interaction is kind of defined using an interact ability. So if we go down here, like I talked about before, how we had Narraive extending the gameplay ability system a little bit, there is also the concept of a interact ability. So abilities are perfect for defining interaction logic because they're asynchronous. They don't just happen once, fire and forget. They can sort of take time, right? Sit down, wait for an input press. When I press the input key, get back up from the seat, whatever. They don't just fire instantly. They can kind of have state and are asynchronous. So abilities are amazing for defining interact logic. And that's exactly how we define them, using the narrative interact ability. And two that we include out of the box are GA interact sit and GA interact mount. And they will both do different behaviors. So both player interaction components and NPC interaction components need to interact with an interactable in the world. And you make something interactable by adding an interactable component to it. So I'll show you what this looks like in the demo map. Let's take this couch, for example. When I click on the couch, the debugging stuff that we've added allows you to actually see the interaction slots. And if I click on the seat interactable, we've added this to this couch to make this couch turn from just a regular old mesh to something you can actually interact with. And you can see that it has some interaction slots added. So that fire and forget type of interaction, that is not this. Interaction slots are the asynchronous, over time type of interaction. And each slot has a transform. You can see I can actually move the transform around. And that defines where AI need to go before they start the interaction. So like if an AI was going to sit down on this seat, he would have to run to this green location. The blue location is actually something that the sit behavior adds in. So not all slot-based interactions need to have the second transform, but sitting does, right? It needs to take you from the green point and move you to the blue point. So sitting adds an extra point in. I'll just show you how that works. So each slot has a slot behavior on it. And in our case, we have this sit offset. And this is the blue thing that you can see. So if I actually go into the sit behavior here, go to the sit offset and move that around, you can see I can move the blue location. And if you wanted to draw in the editor using our debugging, you can just override this function here. That's what we're doing there. But importantly, all of these interaction slots will have something on it called slot interact behavior. This is that interactability that I was telling you about. And this is the logic that fires off when we do the interaction. So you can see there's a handle interaction function and a finish interaction function. Highly recommend, again, just copy and paste some of the content from the demo map if you want to set this up. But you override handle interaction and you use that to actually do the sit. So you can see here I'm moving you to that sit down location, and then we play a sit down montage, and we ignore the seat so that you don't glitch out right? You don't want the character to be colliding with the seat. And yeah, you can see actually sitting is a remarkably complex piece of logic. People would often not realize how complicated sitting is, but it is a very complicated piece of logic. Finish interaction typically is called when you press the interact key again. And this is called automatically for you when the interact key is pressed again. It's useful for things like cars as well. So if I actually go to a car, cars use the exact same setup. Instead of GA interact sit though, they use GA interact mount. So if you go to the car interaction, go to its interaction slots, mount vehicle is the actual one that gets you into a car. Now, I will warn you, mounts are pretty complicated. This is the logic for getting into a car, getting on a horse, getting on some sort of mount. And it is complicated because it needs to open the car door, get in, attach you to the seat, start controlling the car. I mean, there is a real big amount going on here. But this is really one of the reasons why we include the mount behavior out of the box, because we don't really want everyone to have to make their own mount ability. It is a pretty complex thing. But I think mounts are a great example of showing just how far you can take this slot-based interaction behavior. This is just a car that doesn't do anything. But by adding that interaction component to it and adding the mount behavior, you can go pretty far with this. You can do some pretty crazy things. If you're looking for a more fire and forget type of interaction, that is way simpler than the interaction slots. Interaction slots are definitely a lot more complicated. Basically, if you want fire and forget, you just need something like a button or whatever it's going to be, add your interactable, and go to the onInteracted event, and then do whatever you want to do. So way, way, way more simpler with the fire and forget type logic, but obviously not as impressive in the game, I suppose. You can see how interact turns on and off, way, way simpler. And you can change the hold time variable on the interactable component as well to allow for a hold time. But of course, it's not quite as impressive as a slot-based interaction. Slot-based is definitely a lot cooler. And as I mentioned, truly supports that idea of occupying. If you use the gameplay debugger and press the 5 category, numpad 5 to turn that on, you can actually see the status of these seats as well. Pretty awesome system of cooked up here. And if you were wondering, this is how the NPC does his smithing. This is a sit interaction, so it doesn't just have to be used for seats. You can actually use it for lots of stuff. You could even use it for like a bed. Check this out. Pretty cool. All right, that's going to be it for the core framework video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I didn't get around to explaining quest and dialogue blueprints in this video. And we do have a video on quests and dialogue though, so I'd recommend just going and checking that out. We have really amazing quest and dialogue tools, so you can build pretty much any quest or dialogue you want with those. Pretty awesome. Yeah, that's going to be it, guys. Thanks for watching. I'm exhausted. I definitely need to go have a cup of tea. Yeah, thanks for watching, guys. And if you have any more questions, please let me know.